Welcome to another episode of the On the Water podcast. I'm Jimmy Fee.
I'm Cheech.
I'm a little down in the dumps, Cheech.
A little bit.
Last week, our last podcast episode was with Captain Larry Backman, sword fisherman extraordinaire, and he had been on a heater. Yeah, how many trips in a row had he caught swordfish?
So expectations were through the roof, anyways, because he's
Hold on, just how many trips in a row?
17 consecutive trips, bringing at least one swordfish back to the dock, which means there were multiples in that mix, and that spanned back from last year to the trip preceding the Bananatron that Jimmy and I form when we get together to go fishing.
So for 2 years running, over 17 trips, Captain Larry Backman had caught a swordfish on each of those trips until after the podcast, he said, I've got a couple open spots on the trip. If you guys want to join me, I'm heading to Atlantis Canyon. We're going to focus on swordfish. We're going to swordfish by day. We're going to swordfish by night. And I couldn't have been more excited. I've never caught a swordfish. It's very high on my list. It's at the top of Anthony's list for catching. And we unfortunately were there to help break Captain Larry Backman's 17-trip swordfish streak. So we've been a little down in the dumps. Anthony even, according to him, he pulled out all the stops in the middle of the trip and broke out his fishing superstition, which I insist is the worst fishing superstition out there. And that is he ate a bowl of Lucky Charms out there. You know, he was no help for rigging the rods for 15 minutes while he consumed his Lucky Charms.
The rods were already fishing, Jim.
Anyhow, it didn't work. So I posed the question on the On the Water Instagram, what are some of your fishing superstitions? And we got a lot of great answers. Just seeing what people do, to help change their luck when they're fishing. But first, Anthony, do you have any others besides the Lucky Charms?
I mean, as kind of corny as it sounds, I always invite my old man and my uncle.
Oh, we're gonna get sentimental, okay?
Yeah, exactly. We're gonna get deep in the feels, but like I always had done that and gotten some crazy signs and actually that's how Lucky Charms started. Quick little side story. It was the first time tuna fishing since my dad had passed, and I was kind of in a little bit of an emotional wreck. Anyways, just the act of doing something that we love to do.
Tuna fishing was something you two did together a lot. Your dad was a big time tuna fisherman.
The only reason why I'm such a big tuna fisherman is because it was his favorite thing to do, and it was the first time I had a chance to get out. Long story short, we're heading out of Maine actually, and I just kind of had my own little piece of the boat and looked up in the sky and was like, "Hey, bud, let's roll this old chestnut. Let's go put some tuna in the boat. You're coming with me. Bring Uncle Anthony with you, and let's put some tuna in the boat." So we get out there, and I just kind of getting everything set up. The guy we were fishing with at that time really didn't know much about giant fishing, so I got everything in order and kind of settled in for the wait. And I happened to ask him, I'm like, "Hey, Cap, when's slack tide?" And he's like, I think it was like 10:15 or something. So I'm literally cracking open a thing of Lucky Charms, and I look at my watch, and it was 9:20 something. I said, "We're gonna get bit at 9:48," and literally on the minute of 9:48, balloon went down. We were tight. Half a thing of Lucky Charms went over the side, and I ran to the rod and started reeling. And I just looked up to my old man. I was like, "Dude, you kidding me right now? On the minute?" And I called the next bite within 2 minutes later that day. So that's kind of where the Lucky Charms thing started. It hadn't been going for all my life. Doesn't work on swords.
It's a good story, though. I didn't realize it was that meaningful. I'll stop giving you shit for it. Mine was always Lucky Hats. I always wore a Phillies hat. I had an old. It was
that
a
was
Cooper's
the best hat.
Oh, it was the best. I still have it. Cooperstown Collection Phillies hat. It was the old 1980s P on it, the maroon style, and I wore that thing till it literally fell apart. Actually, I'd worn it for years before I started working it on the water. And I got here, it was already in terrible shape. I remember I wore it to work a couple times as an intern, and Kevin said, "Please stop wearing that to work. It smells."
Common theme.
It kind of ran out of its mojo. but I was still wearing it because that was
It ran out of its mojo because there was no fabric left. It was just the shell of the hat.
But wait, it gets better. So I was on Cutty Hunk Island, and a wave blasted me off a rock. Total yard sale. My plug bag came open. Plugs were floating all around me. Lost my hat, and it was gone. I was like, well, that's as good an end as any for that hat. So went back home. Went back to Falmouth.
Was the fishing good that day?
I caught a couple, but it wasn't great. It wasn't like the legendary Cutty Hunk surf casting I'd gone there for.
It would have been good if it went out with a bang.
So a couple months later, I get an email saying, hey, I subscribed to On the Water. I've got a weird question for you. Did you lose a hat on Cutty Hunk?
No way.
I saw a picture of you in the magazine, and he sent a picture of the hat. He goes, I saw a picture of this hat in the magazine. I had found a Phillies hat just like that while I was surf fishing on Cutty Hunk. And because I'm from Philadelphia, he said the only reason I picked it up, because it was, obviously filthy, covered in seaweed and, God knows what before I lost it. And he said, I brought it home with me. He goes, do you want it back? I said, hell yeah, I want it back. So he sent it back to me. It had good mojo for another 6 or 7 years until it really got to the point that I couldn't fish it anymore. I got a new fishing hat, another Phillies hat, the modern one. That one had juice for a couple years, but now that one's out of its mojo. I'm on to a new, like old style Phillies hat, and that one has not done anything. So I'm going to start rotating through hats.
That's so they have a shelf life, huh?
Oh yeah, runs out.
There's a certain amount. I like that, dude. I got goosebumps from that. That's crazy. That he would recognize that this might be Jimmy Fee's hat.
Yeah, he just knew the hat. It was
crazy.
I just started with On the Water. There happened to be a picture of me with the hat.
So cool
in that issue. But so here are some of the ones that we were sent in. There were some funny ones in here. A lot, they follow a common theme. Some clothes are lucky, others are not lucky. We saw a lot of first cast catches. The first cast curse, and I'm a big believer in the first cast curse.
I subscribe to that wholeheartedly. The first cast is a curse.
I think
first cast fish.
I think that it's a curse. I think people associate it with bad luck because it means you got there too late. It's like if you caught a fish on your first cast, then they were there before you, and that's why it's kind of bad luck. But there is a way to break the first cast curse, and I'm a firm believer in this too. If you catch a fish on your second cast, all's forgiven. There's no first cast curse is null and void if you catch a fish.
Two negatives equal a positive in
exactly.
That case.
So if you catch a fish on your first 2 casts, then that's very good luck. Don't bring out the scale or don't bring out the net until it's needed. That's a big one.
Captain Larry said, "Don't touch the gaff until it's needed."
I noticed it made its way out a little earlier than it should have been.
We thought we had a wahoo on, and it turned out to be a mahi because we were trolling for wahoo in between sword moves because the water was just so warm, and it figured like it was the smart thing to do.
People had a lot of food superstitions too. I
love those.
Not just the bananas. Bananas went one of 2 ways. Some people said no bananas ever, and people said always bananas. No, I'm no bananas. I think they're bad luck.
But I don't care about them. That same trip that I predicted the tuna with the Lucky Charms came from, the captain had bananas in the galley, banana bread in the galley, and I'm like, dude, you have all forms of banana here. He's like, oh yeah, he was literally eating one, saying like, yeah, that doesn't matter. And I'm like, it's probably why you haven't caught a tuna.
Yeah, Rob Taylor had a great line on our first podcast where he said, if the captain's worried about a fruit, he goes, you've chosen the wrong captain. But a lot of people were divided on that. But other lucky foods included Reese's Cups, 7-Eleven hoagies, buffalo wing and blue cheese combos, and blueberry Pop-Tarts. I've never had
combos on that sword trip.
So I'm
gonna cross that one off. Whoever sent that one in, you're wrong.
I've never had a lucky food. I that's never been one of mine. I know Andy's big on he's big on like the good luck fishing snacks.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like mortadella and provolone sandwiches with the Khalees bread was always kind of good luck because it was on every trip that we went on with my old man, and I just figured like, oh, that must be their lucky food. But it turns out that they were just incredible fishermen, and it didn't matter what they were eating.
So another one was fresh baked chocolate chip cookies from the wife. I think you've gotten lucky in all aspects if your wife's baking cookies for you before the trip.
Exactly. Whose wife does that? Mine chases me down the driveway yelling at me. What time are you going to be home?
There was another one. Hold on. It's like if the fishing's been slow and I call my girlfriend, then the fishing picks up.
I like that.
That's a good one. It's a kind of, it's like a change the luck situation. That's something where if things aren't going well, you have that little thing in the middle of it. Like for me, surf fishing when would be chunking, it's like if you run up to the duns and take a leak, like a lot of times you'd come back to a bite to the rod.
You don't do that. You pay in your waders. Come on.
No, not my waders. You'd have to be a serial killer to just let urine slosh around in your
smelled
boots.
your truck before. I like the no music as a superstition, meaning that's probably bad luck. I'm assuming that's what that person meant, or it could go either way. I guess some people don't. If I'm fishing shallow, I don't want to have music playing on the boat.
Yeah, I like the no music. No, especially I know people that surf fish with earbuds in, and I can't do it. Like it's supposed to be a fully immersive experience, but I do like music on headboats.
Yeah, no, I want music on if music isn't going to impact the fishing. I think that, like, songs can be good luck, like this is a good song, and then, sharking, for whatever reason, reggae and sharks always brought the sharks to the boat and into the slick, for me anyways. I like the music one. It can work both ways, though. I love this one. This one is one that I do all the time. I don't really consider it a superstition, but gotta call the last cast out loud. Lets the fish gods know to send a fish to bite. I do that every time I'm fishing.
Last cast it's supposed to be a ritual, and this is something my old manager at Fanatics Bait and Tackle, Ed Bronstein, used to say. He goes, here, you have to declare last cast, you have to say it out loud, then the cast must come back clean. Like, you can't miss a fish, it can't come back with weeds on it. Like, it has to be a perfect offering, a perfect final offering. And if it's
compromised in any way, you get another last cast.
You need another last cast.
I agree with that. Back to the with the whole last cast thing. Is it ever the last cast? Like, I announce it. I'm like, last cast. I might say it to myself, whatever. But it never seems to be the last cast.
I usually count down. Like, it's like, okay, 5 more. And if it doesn't happen, then those 5 more, I'm like, all right, 5 more. And eventually, I don't even know if I've ever said last cast and had that be the last cast. It doesn't seem to be.
Do you consider yourself superstitious in general, fishing-wise? Like, I don't, but then I find myself doing all kinds of weird stuff to change luck. When I said pull out all the stops, like if we were going for a long stretch, which was 2 days in the canyons, it was like, what can I do to change things? A lot of times, like, I'd be like, all right, something needs to happen. I'm going to go lay down. Even though I didn't want to lay down, I'm like, if I go lay down, I'm going to hear a clip snap or somebody say fish on, or, you just do things to change up what's not working.
It's like the watch pot never boils. Like, you want to, okay, I'm not going to watch the rods. I'm not going to pay attention. Like, maybe if I shift my focus elsewhere, that's going to work.
Yep. I do that often.
Another one is no deodorant. You need a stink on the boat. All right.
Don't want to fish with that guy.
Nah. Pour some beer on my cut carp bait for gator guard. There were a couple of those. There were a couple of pour out some beer at the beginning of the trip.
Yeah.
And another one I saw was spit on the bait. And I've heard that a couple times. I don't know if it's a New England thing. Like, have you ever heard that one before?
I have not heard it until this, but I kind of like it. I'm not going to lie. I kind of like it.
So it was one of those, for me, growing up, like, I heard that, I don't know if I read this in Field and Stream or heard it at the bait shop, but like, saliva neutralizes scent. So if you put sunscreen or bug screen on, then spit, and you handle the bait, then spit on the bait and the saliva. There's probably nothing to back that up.
That makes zero sense.
But
I like it.
When I was little and I would put sunscreen on, I would then spit on my hands or spit on the bait to try and rub it, which is completely gross habit.
It must be a Philly thing.
It's not a Philly thing. I read it somewhere. I wouldn't have made that up. The other one I remember also, I definitely read this in Field and Stream, and somebody wrote, if I see a deer on the way to fishing, it's good luck. And that was one where it's like, if the cow, if you drive past a farm and the livestock's up and active, it's going to be a good day, because if they're active, then the fish in the water are active.
It makes sense.
And that was one, we used to drive past a farm on the way to Springton Reservoir, which was my fishing spot when I was young. And always, if the cows were sitting down, it was always, the day was doomed from there, at least in my mind. I can't remember if it ever actually played out that way, but...
I like it. We saw a lot of deer on the way to the Montauk at the rail.
Oh, yeah.
Shoot with...
Yeah, if you live on the North Fork of Long Island or in the east...
every day is going to be a good fishing day.
Exactly. There's a lot of deer out
your
there.
Back straps. Yeah, and we didn't fish too well on that day, but the boat caught fish, so... Maybe that holds water.
It was a great trip. But anyhow, our guest for this week does not seem to rely on superstition at all. It is Eric Harrison.
He is the good luck charm.
And I think what's his good luck charm is just a love of fishing. That's something that Kevin and I had the conversation with him, and he just seems to love being out there as much as possible, no matter what he's catching, no matter how he's catching it. He just enjoys being out there, and that's probably the best good luck charm of all.
You know what? Now that you bring that up, like the most positive people that were always like, how does this guy always get out for the epic trip? Like, it's always the happiest, happy-go-lucky dudes out there. Joe Gugino's another one. Yeah. Where, it's just every trip seems to be like, unicorns and rainbows. It's ridiculous.
And we're just mud goblins and mahi. But if you have a fishing superstition that we didn't mention, we want to hear it. Send it to us at feedback@onthewater.com, and we will mention it on an upcoming podcast.
Yeah, same thing goes for any questions, any feedback whatsoever, podcast related. Hit us up. We love to hear from you. Thanks for tuning in. The On the Water podcast is brought to you by Guidesley. Are you looking to book a fishing trip with a renowned hand-selected expert in the field? Guidesley has the best guides in the best destinations. Whether you've never fished before or you're a regular on the water, let Guidesley hook you up with the best captains in your area. They'll put you on the best catches of your life. You can search and book your dream trip now on Guidesley.com or download their app, Guidesley Fishing Trips. Book a Guidesley trip today and create memories that will last a lifetime.
I'm Jimmy Fee. This is Kevin Blinkoff. Welcome to another episode of the On the Water podcast. Our guest this week is Eric Harrison, striped bass kayak fisherman, and kind of, you do a little bit of everything, Eric. I think you fish almost every day, it looks like.
Well, it looks like that, but I don't actually fish every day. Usually 2 or 3 times a week. And then in the summer, some weeks I'll get a little more in. Like, vacation weeks, I try to get all 7 days at least. So.
Yeah, Eric's been our kayak columnist for going on 10 years now, I
think this is year 11.
Awesome. Wow. And one of my favorite columns you've done over the last year was what you call the jog fish, where you kind of work the kayak fishing or fishing in general into almost your daily routine.
That's really what it's about. Like the idea of a jog fish is that you're going out for a jog, you're going out for a run, but instead of going for a run, you're going fishing. So that way it's like more fun. Because like everybody smiles when they go fishing, and not everybody's smiling when they're running. So you go out and it doesn't matter like how long you're going to spend fishing. Like sometimes I'll spend more time driving. Like I'll spend 30 minutes driving somewhere. I'll take like 10 casts and I'll drive 30 minutes home. And it's just because I wanted to get out and take a few casts. It's about the experience of going fishing. And I also try to set up my jog fish so I go out and I actually do catch something. Like most of the time I'm driving 10 or 15 minutes and going to a specific spot with a specific idea in mind. And I like to just, spend my week, if I can get out, 2 days early. I don't really count those as fishing trips. So when you say how often do I fish, those don't really count.
I try that with my wife a lot.
Yeah.
If I'm gone
I'll be
for
back
more than
in
10
an hour.
minutes.
I'm going to get some milk.
It counts. One day I won't come back.
So how long have you been such a passionate fisherman? Did it start off, did you start young, and has it always been kayak fishing?
It took me a while. I would say I wasn't really a hardcore fisherman until I was 13.
Okay.
Yeah. So like my elementary school years, we fished, but like only once or twice a week. And I really didn't start until I was like in 4th or 5th grade. So by the time I was in middle school, like I was fishing often. And by the time I was in high school, it was like every day I wasn't working or every day I could.
And where were you living at the time?
I was living in Southern California.
Wow. So what was that fishing like as a high schooler? What kind of fish were you fishing for?
My number one fish back then was bonito.
Okay.
And it was like, of all the fish I've caught in my life, excluding mackerel, because mackerel as an incidental catch in California are impossible to avoid. I've caught more bonito than anything else. I mean, I probably used to catch 2,000 to 3,000 bonito a year.
Wow.
And so, I have a lot of experience bonito fishing.
And how on the Pacific side, the Pacific bonito, how does that compare to the ones we catch here?
They look exactly the same. Like when I caught my first one, the first one I ever caught, was when I had moved back here to go to college. I'm guessing it was like 1980, 81. And I'm fishing at the canal. And I'm using actually one of my bonito jigs from California and expecting, in that time, you went to the canal for bluefish. So it's August, I'm fishing for bluefish, and I hooked this fish. And I'm like, oh my God, that looks just like a bonito. And it's, it's a ways out. But I see that flash, and that flash is like imprinted on my mind because I've seen that flash thousands and thousands of times. And the guy standing next to me is like, wow, you got a nice bluefish. I'm like, I think that's a bonito. Do you catch a bonito here? He's like, no, you got a nice bluefish. And I get it closer, and I'm like, oh, that's a bonito. He's like, that's a big bluefish. And I slide it up onto the sand there because I got it down at the east end. And the guy says, hey, that's a nice bonito. So that was my very first one, and that was like a 9-pound bonito,
Wow.
which in California, like I don't think I ever caught a 9-pound bonito.
Wow.
Yeah.
And do you use the same tactics that you used on the for California bonito? Have you brought any of those tactics over to this side?
I have, but mostly for Albies because I haven't done much bonito fishing here. The number one, like the tube and worm of bonito fishing, is what we call splash and feather, and here it's float and fly or what is
Same
it?
idea, yeah.
Yeah, it's the
casting
same
egg.
thing. But the whole thing about like the California way of doing it is you're using a clear plastic bubble filled with water, and it slides on your line like an egg sinker. You put a swivel on, and then like for bonito, we used like anywhere from an 8 to 30 foot leader.
Wow,
And
30 feet?
30 feet. So the normal length was like 10 feet, and you splash with it. The idea is the splashing brings the bonito up. And a lot of this was pier fishing. So you could really see the reaction as you splashed. And that just calls, like you could see sometimes the bonito down deep. You start splashing, and those fish come right up, and they're just looking around that, and they see your fly, and they're just up on it. And it works just as well or even better for Albies. Spanish mackerel go absolutely crazy over it. Spanish mackerel have a way of jumping out of the water and landing on your fly. They really go crazy over it. It's a super fun rig to use. It's absolutely the best topwater fishing you could ever imagine. The first time I ever tried it was at the West Wall. And I caught a couple fish early in the morning. And there was a guy fishing next to me that wasn't catching anything, and he just kept looking over at me like I was there's something wrong with me. I think he had never seen anybody fishing with that. And then I cast out, and when my splasher hit the water, I could see a commotion on the surface a long ways away. So I cranked really fast, got that splasher moving. As soon as that splasher started moving, there was an albie that was half in, half out of the water for like 60 feet, just tore over to where my fly was. And the hit that it made, because it was just right on the surface, and I'm pulling at the same time, I pulled that fish while it was moving, and the splash was like a tuna-sized splash. And when I got that one in, the guy fishing next to me comes over and says, "What are you using? You've got to explain this rig to me." So it's really a fun rig to use. And I know a few guys that I've gotten to use it here, and they've been very successful at it. It's not a great rig from the kayak, but it's a really good jetty and shore fishing rig. It's not as good for boats because you have this long leader. And I mentioned that I use them up to 30 feet. So this was one of those discoveries when you go fishing and there's this old guy next to you and he's totally schooling you. I'm like 25 years old. This guy is fishing next to me, and he's hooking a fish like probably every 10 minutes. I caught one. And I'm watching him, and I'm like, those swirls are like way behind. And then he's using like a huge rod. And then I realize this guy's got a leader that like he has to handline the fish in the last few feet. So I switched over right away as soon as I realized what he was doing, and bang, I just started catching fish. And it was a wintertime thing. In Southern California, there's still bonito around in the wintertime. They get really hard to catch. They get really picky. and they're not the same level of activity they are in the summertime. And just adding that 30 feet on there just makes a huge difference in their willingness to come up and scope out your fly.
Interesting. So it's really tough to cast a 30-foot leader in any other situation than if you're up on a tall pier. But that tells me that
This was actually on a jetty. And
Okay.
basically your motion is to do kind of a roll cast. So you can't stop casting. If you're going to take a break from casting, you take a break after you cast. So you cast out, you let it sit in the water. Because as soon as you get it in, you have to go into the motion of casting, because the fly, generally when you're doing this, you tie flies that are very light, like praying hands, like 4 feathers on a hook, and that's it. Super light, so it casts really easily. And it's much less dangerous casting this 8 to 10 foot leader than most people think. It's more dangerous for the people around you than it is you.
That's how I like
So,
it. So
yeah, exactly. So, if you're not fishing with good friends, you got nothing to worry about.
But that tells me I'm going to think about this fall when I'm out bonito and albie fishing, how
Yes.
important a long leader can be. Because a lot of times we'll downsize if they're picky and go down to a 12-pound fluoro leader or something like that. But now I'm realizing the length of that could really matter too, especially when you're fishing with braided line, high visibility stuff like that.
Yeah. So the keys with the really picky fish for me have been to slow down, do much less. Just like when you're fishing for largemouths with a popper, you're not like working it super fast across the surface. And if the albies aren't jacked up, you don't want to go fast. You want to go so it's just making a V, and then you do a snap of the wrist, so it goes push. And the advantage of those cast-a-bubbles is they make a tunoid splash every time you do it. It's not a cupped popper splash. It's the sound of a bonito or an albie hitting the surface. Every time you do that, it makes that splash. And it's really like you get so that you do it, and it's not splash, splash, splash. It's move it along, splash, move it along, splash, move it along, splash. And when they're on, it's just like bluefish fishing. You cast it out there, crank it as hard as you can, and just watch. It doesn't matter if you hook up or not. And if you don't hook up, what you do, especially on a jetty, if you can see them following it, you just stop. And you just let that fly sink. And just the takes there are just crazy, because a lot of times they speed up when they see that and just boom, they just go racing by. Those are usually very powerful hits.
So you like the clear casting, the plastic ones? Oh, have you tried the wooden casting eggs at all?
Yes.
Not inferior?
I grew up with those, and when there was a brand called Cast-a-Bubble, which I don't think is out there anymore, and they really took over the market because they basically eliminate the line twist part of wooden splashers. Create a lot of line twist, and that's just the challenge. But I do have a wooden splasher about this big, and that's the one that we use to catch skipjacks and yellowfin and yellowtail and stuff like that. And we would often stick it back in our trolling spread, not necessarily hoping we were going to catch a fish on that, but that the splashing is going to bring the fish, just like you would use a bird. So it's just one more rig up in the spread that's bringing those fish up.
I'm sorry. I'm like, my mind is just now, all I'm thinking about is albie fishing, but and I can't wait for the season, but I know we brought you in here because you are a kayak columnist, and I want to hear more about kayak fishing. So
One more question about that. Up here for the Albies, how are you using the 10 to 30? Are you using like a 10-foot leader up here too?
For albies, mostly when I'm doing it out of my kayak, I'm using 6 to 8 feet.
Okay.
And when I'm off the jetties and stuff, I'm using like 8 to 10.
I'm trying the landing with a 6 to 8 foot leader in the kayak must be interesting.
It's not that bad.
No.
Yeah. It's that's why you do keep it shorter when you're in the kayak, is because it's the end game. And the other thing is that albies tend, like, different species have different patterns. Like bonito are very sight oriented, often in clear water, generally a much more picky fish. They're not necessarily ram feeding. They're going up and picking off one fish at a time, and that really, like, they have a pattern, so you want that longer leader. The Albies are just charging through those schools. So when an Albie hits often another Albie's following behind, and they're hitting fleeing bait fish from that first Albie. So the shorter leader brings it in, and so you know it's a different fish, a different style of fishing.
No, I have to say, I read, it was probably maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I remember editing and publishing and reading one of your columns where you talked about using the splasher and fly. And so I had a popping cork from fishing down in Florida that I had left over, and I brought it out albie fishing just in case. And I was off Knobska Point. The albies were super picky, so I gave it a try. I used the popping cork. Maybe 4 or 5 feet behind that, I put a fly. And it was one of my first few casts after I did that on. I bring it back through, excited. Okay, I think this is going to work. And sure enough, an albie comes up and just smashes the popping cork. Ignored the fly completely, but hit the popping cork. So probably what I should have done is gone with a bigger lure rather than trying to downsize with that rig. But does that ever happen with the casting bubble, or is that like a different kind of
It
splash?
happens less frequently, but it does happen. Bluefish are the worst.
Oh,
And
yes.
yeah, I mean that's the drawback of this rig on the East Coast is bluefish. Stripers will occasionally eat it, but stripers don't really eat the bubble. The splash and feather works really, really well for stripers when they're on small bait. I was out fishing this morning, and if I had splasher and feather, I would have crushed them. Just because of the way those fish were feeding, I could have put on a tiny fly and just gotten it there. And those fish were all feeding together. You hear them coming up, splash, splash together, and then they're moving on. And if you have that splasher, you're pulling them in and you're saying, hey, feed around me.
Yeah, it's kind of a great blind casting technique. Like,
Yes.
I messed with it a little bit last year. I'm definitely going to be doing more of it this year. But when the albies were around and feeding, but not feeding within casting range, it seemed like that was you're keeping a lure in the water the whole time rather than holding your cast and waiting for the albies to pop up within range. That's what I really liked about it.
Yes, I would say that it's most effective when you're not chasing fish. When you're chasing fish, just an epoxy jig hitting those boils. But last year, my only couple albie trips that I made, there were no fish breaking either time I came. And I literally just sat there for 3 hours casting my splasher and feather. And one of the days I picked up 3 fish when I didn't see anybody around me catching fish and there were no breaking fish. And I just did the same drift over and over. And I just picked an area that I saw bait and just kept going through the same area, drifting by, pedaling back up, drifting by again, and just working it.
That's a good tip for people who travel to the Cape. They've got a couple days a week to fish, and they come down and the albies aren't there that day. You still have a shot to get them. Just adjust your presentation a little bit, find the bait, and kind of sit on that. But we should transition over to kayak fishing eventually. We're right on the cusp of albie season right now, so you almost can't help but talk about it. We're all looking forward to it right now. But along, you said you were a real hardcore fisherman through high school. When did you pick up the kayak fishing?
Well, the irony is that I grew up in one of the prime areas for kayak fishing in Southern California. That's where people were fishing longboards out there before kayaks came along. And I didn't do any of that. And then when I moved here, I started fishing the canal, all the regular spots that people fish, but wasn't really happy with a lot of the fishing situations I was getting in, a lot of crowds. So I started moving out and fishing mostly around Boston to cut down my drive times because I live around Boston. And then I realized, every area that I'm fishing could easily be fished from a kayak. So I went out and got my first paddle kayak, and it was a sit-in, and started paddling it around and just catching a ton of fish in it, and realized, wow, this is a really good way to catch fish. My initial idea when I bought the kayak was, hey, this is going to help me. I could go to the Harbor Islands. I could go to rock piles that they'd expose at low tide because there's a bunch of rock piles around Boston. I had a couple rock piles that I used to haul my kayak out on. And
so more using it as a ferry than a fishing platform.
I carried my surf rod with me for the whole first season. And I used it probably the first 2 trips because I got out of the kayak and I fished. And then after that, it kind of sat inside the kayak for a while. And then at some point I realized, yeah, I'm not getting out ever again. and then like around that time, I found the Hobie and realized I can pedal in any rip, any current, and the pedal kayaks just totally changed the game. And like as soon as I got a pedal kayak, I was all in. Mm-hmm. You know, I really, like when I had my paddle kayak, I was doing a mix of surf fishing and kayaking. But once I got the pedals, it was just so much easier to go out and just pedal around from spot to spot.
Yeah, to be able to, first of all, use the pedals to go wherever you want and stay in current, and then also to have your hands free to hold the rod versus having to put the rod down to deal with paddling. It really did kind of revolutionize kayak fishing. Now, when you first got out there and started fishing from a kayak, you said originally the sit inside and then eventually the Hobie. At that time, there weren't a lot of other kayak fishermen out there. I mean, did you see many other people doing it? Did you get a lot of questions?
I did get a lot of questions. There weren't a lot of people out there doing it. There was a few regulars in the area, a couple hardcore guys out there with their kayaks, and those were the guys that I probably saw when I was shore fishing and was like, hey, that guy's on fish and I'm not.
Yep.
But part of kayaking is like if you really like surf fishing, like one of the things I really like about surf fishing is like it's immersive. Like you're in the water, you're right there with the fish. It's not like in a boat where you're above the fish, you're a little bit detached from the situation. When you're surf fishing, you're right up in there with them. And that was one of the things I didn't like so much about the canal. Like the canal is kind of like jetty fishing. And it also started getting crowded, and I was like, yeah, I could move on to much more lightly fished waters and catch just as many fish. So, the kayak helped with that transition.
Now, I remember I was living in Boston in the early 2000s, and I started fishing Deer Island. And I remember that was the first time I saw kayak fishermen out there.
That was probably me.
And I sometimes wonder, I was like, was that you? I remember seeing a guy, carting his kayak right from the parking lot there, launching it, had it on wheels. And I'm looking and thinking, and I've been fishing there and a lot of times watching bluefish stripers breaking beyond my casting distance because I was always going during the daytime. But this, what I thought also kind of blew my mind was this was getting towards sunset and getting toward dark. I was on my way home, and I'm watching a kayak fisherman go to launch. And then around that same time, then there was an article in the Boston Globe that covered the fact that people were nighttime kayak fishing in Boston Harbor, and that blew my mind. I'm like, okay, Boston Harbor's scary. There's ships, there's traffic, there's all this stuff, and it was all about these fishermen that were going out and fishing nighttime in Boston Harbor from kayaks and catching huge striped bass. And I mean, you were a big part of that. You were one of the hardcore guys getting out there. I remember Sean Ruge was another one. He was out there. I think Jeff Lopez were kind of some of the original guys who kind of pioneered that fishing along with you. What was that like? How'd you get into that experience of nighttime kayak fishing Boston Harbor?
Well, I always did a lot of night fishing. Like when I was living in Southern California, I did a lot of night fishing. That was more chunking for sharks and rays. But when I moved here, I realized that if I wanted to get into more consistent bites and better quality fish, I started doing all my surf fishing at night. Switched from my day trips because they just weren't as productive. I would go out and catch, in the late 90s, you would go out and you'd only catch like 30 to 40 fish that were, 16 to 24 inches. But if you went at night, you get like more like 40 to 80 fish, and they would be a variety of sizes, but generally smaller fish. Like, we in the 90s, it was many, many more fish than we're catching now, but many smaller fish. If there were big fish around, I think they were having a hard time getting to our baits because there were so many small fish. And
you had those big spawns in the early 90s, mid 90s. So, going into the early 2000s, you had that boom of the schoolies. That's when you saw saltwater fly fishing really take off too.
Yes. There was a whole whole bunch of businesses that formed around all those schoolies. All the sluggos, hoagies, all those lures became really popular because they're so effective on smaller bass. And and then as people realized, oh, these bass are getting bigger, our baits got bigger. I went from using a 6-inch or a 10-inch hoagie to mostly using a 13 or 14-inch hoagie. And that was just the shifting of the sizes and the greater availability of bigger fish that this started happening in the early to mid 2000s.
And that's something, I mean, that also became, along with kayak fishing, I think of you as fishing those long, soft plastic stick baits, skipping the live eels, skipping all the live bait and targeting large striped bass with, big soft plastic jigs.
Yeah, so living in California, I fished a lot of party boats. And on a party boat, you can do okay with plastics, and I loved to fish plastics on those boats. But if you switched over to bait, you would just absolutely crush it. And I always hated that. It bothered me that these fish were stupid when you had a live bait on there, but when you tied on, my strategy was 3-pronged. I would have a bait rod, actually 2 bait rods, one with a weight and one for fly lining, one with a jig with a soft plastic on it, and one with a metal. So that way I was able to just switch between rods. And I caught a lot of fish on the plastics, but when I got here, I was like, wow, these stripers really eat the plastics. They really hit the jigs. And everybody else is saying, oh, you use eels. And so I took eels out with me a few times, and I'm dragging them around, and I'm like, oh, this is just so freaking boring. And I'm not a troller. Trolling for me is like, watching paint dry. So I couldn't do it, and I would stop and take a few casts with my plastic, and I'd hook up a fish. And so then I'd rack the eel rod and start catching them on plastic. And then I'd start casting the eel and dragging it along, and then finally I'd catch a fish on the eel, casting it instead of trolling it. And I was like, yeah, it's just not as much fun fishing the eels. And I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I had a night where I was trolling an eel around. It had been, kind of a difficult couple of weeks for a bite. But there was a lot of fish around, obviously, I could see them on my fish finder, and I just wasn't getting the bites. So I'm trolling along, I grab my rod, and I'm like, I'm seeing marks. Zing it out there, hook up a fish. I was fighting this fish. It's good fish, 42-inch bass. And then I notice my kayak is spinning funny. And I look, and my eel rod is doubled over. So now I have 2 fish on. I grab that rod. I fought both fish simultaneously, got them up to the boat, pulled them up on the kayak, took a picture of them side by side, got them both off the hooks and let them go. That was the last time I fished eels, and I told myself I am never fishing eels again.
Now, when you fish soft plastics, a lot of people think of those you use the big hoagies. A lot of people are familiar with sluggos. A lot of people fish them with a worm hook, no weight on them, and they think of it that way as kind of a lightweight, sort of more of a top water or just barely subsurface lure. But that's not exactly the technique you're using when you're fishing around Boston Harbor and areas like that. Can you describe a little bit for me, how do you fish soft plastics, and what have you found to be most effective?
Yeah, I will say that over the last 6 or 7 years, I do use more weightless baits than I ever did before. But I'm probably 70-30 jig heads to weightless. I really like fishing them weightless because of the hits you get. Weightless is great when you're 8 feet or less. But there are times when you're 8 feet or less, even in 5 feet of water, where just using a small jig head to just keep it in that bottom foot or even drag it along the bottom makes a huge difference.
How heavy of a jig head are you using?
In general, I'm fishing in 12 feet or less. I'm using a 1/2 ounce, and anywhere from 8 to 15 feet, I'm using 3/4 of an ounce. Just depends on the conditions. It depends on the current and the wind. It's really about keeping in touch with the bait. What you don't want to do is send your bait right down to the bottom. You want your bait to sink down to the bottom slowly. You want it to swim on its own. A huge number of the hits that you get, especially from big fish, you get bit on the sink. If you've never been bit on the sink, you wouldn't believe how many fish you've missed in your life. Because I talk to people all the time. They say, "Oh, I never get bit on the sink." I'm like, "Yes, you do.
You do. You just don't know it." Yeah.
You don't know it, and you missed all those fish. And I'll tell you, a lot of times, like, it's just that the slightest little tap, even with those big fish, have a different kind of bite that they give. Like when you're fishing those big baits, you get this tap, and it's like, that's not the fish I'm after. Mm-hmm. And then there's other times where it's going along and you just get that thump. And it's like, that was a big fish eat. And it just feels different. But there are other times where you get it. And it's more than that little tap of the small fish, but it's not that big eat that you're expecting. And what it probably is it's a less active striper coming up and just putting his mouth over your jig. Not sucking it in like they often do, because they have that giant head. You think about some of those stripers, like their heads, like when I hold them up in their kayak, their heads are like this big.
Yeah, I'm looking right above your head right now, actually. Yeah.
It's like a 5-gallon bucket opening up and filling with water. And but if they're swimming along and they've already got their mouth open and they're not doing that fast feed, it's a much lighter bite. And so you got to be ready for all the different types of feeds that are going on. Stripers really change their attitude through a tide. You'll go through part of a tide when they're willing to feed and part of the tide when they're not. And you can still get bites when they're not willing to feed. And it's about working your bait. It's switching up between the weightless and the weighted, going slower, going faster. It's constantly trying something different. Like when you're not getting bites. And I have a good friend that I fish with all the time, and we tell each other what we're getting bit on. And so, we'll be trying different things. And if you start to see, okay, the last 3 hits I got were all when I was doing this, you start to work that pattern. You tell the other guy, hey, I just got 3 hits going like as slow as you can or dragging it along the bottom. I just got a couple blow-ups, just cranking as fast as I can, skipping it across the top.
And there'll be a lot of times in surf casting where you think that the fish have moved on at a certain part of the tide, and you think, oh, they're gone. But it turns out they're still there. They just got tired of whatever you're throwing. They stopped feeding on, they're not as aggressive or whatever. Somebody switches a lure, the guy next to you switches to a different presentation, and all of a sudden back on again. So
yeah, that was part of another feature you wrote for us about kayak fishing and electronics and how that's kind of changed things. Whereas without a good set of electronics that you know how to work properly, you would think that the fish stopped biting, they left, whereas they just changed their mode.
Yes, definitely. Like, I really like I have a Humminbird Helix, and, it's nice to have, I'm a data guy. I like the information, but it's nice to know that you're on fish. Like in a kayak, you're not going to go rushing off and say, oh, there's a better rip that's 5 miles away. I can just go over there. It's not like being in a boat. Right? There are plenty of situations that I fish in a kayak that I would not fish if I was in a boat. And sometimes it's worse, sometimes it's better. Sometimes it forces you to stick in one spot, stick in one prime zone, and fish it and get bites. Because you would normally leave those fish because they're inactive. Like you can see them on the fish finder. And if you were in a boat, you'd be like, well, you know what? We spent 30 minutes on these fish. But since you're in a kayak, you got 2.5 more hours of fishing time left. You're not going to leave those fish. You're going to keep working them as long as they don't get annoyed and leave. And at some point during the tide, that school of fish is going to turn on, that school of fish is going to start biting, and you're going to get your fish.
Yeah, I feel that way about kayak fishing for Albies, where I've been in boats where you just want to chase every bird you see, every blitz you see, and you end up almost chasing your tail, it feels like. Whereas being forced to slow down in the kayak, I never feel like I'm at a major disadvantage to the boats in the kayak. I mean, there's those days for sure where the Albies are going to pop up a half mile away and I'm never going to get to them. But other days, just by slowing down, staying in the area with the bait, I never feel shorted for shots at them in the kayak. It's my favorite way to fish for Albies.
Yeah, sometimes with the Albies, you find a hump that is pushing the water up, and there's a whole bunch of bait right behind the hump, and you just kind of hang there and you wait because you notice it like every 20 minutes they're blowing up on it. One of the things, I used to fish Redondo Harbor a lot in California, and Redondo Harbor was just a legendary spot for bonito fishing. Articles in Saltwater Sportsman on it, and it just happened to be one of my home waters. And those bonito in that harbor would circle around the harbor, and they would set up a pattern, and you could sit in one spot, in like every 30 or 40 minutes you would catch a fish. And you had to just stay in that spot and just wait for them to come through. And these were not breaking fish. These were just fish that were just kind of doing a big loop around a large harbor. And, bonito are fast fish, and, they're doing a couple mile loop, and they're just traveling that loop over and over again. And they do that. And on the piers of Southern California, you would see them going back and forth around the pier. And a lot of times they go back and forth and they're hurting the bait. Like you see them just pushing all the smelt and silver sides right up against the pier. They go down it, and then they turn into the surf, and they come back. And every once in a while, they put the hammer down and go with it. But that's the thing. It's like you notice these things happening in certain spots. And if you can position your kayak into those spots, you're going to be able to be on the fish and get in that first blow up, because that first blow up is the one you want to cast at. Like the boaters see the blow up and they're coming over to it. And they have the advantage that they're going to cast more blow ups than you. But you have the advantage of, it just blew up next to me because I was sitting on the bait fish and I just hit it. And that's your best shot in a kayak, is that right away bite.
Kevin's got a ton of GoPro footage from the last 2 seasons of you just being in the right place at the right time where you get that first, and it's within feet.
And I would say that's the biggest change that I've made in the way I fish for Albies, is trying to find and stay with the bait. And that's, a lot of times in a boat, looking like you said, I'm trying to decipher the pattern of where the fish are. And there are some places where, like you said, they will follow a route. But then there's also places where you're like, oh, I think they keep blowing up in this spot. I think they're doing a circle. Well, it turns out, no, just that spot is where there's a pot of bait sitting, and they're just feeding on it, and then they swim away and they wait for the bait to ball up, and then they come back to it. So that's something that I do a lot with my kayak, is just, I see the bait, I see it down below, and I'm just kind of staying with it. And that's, like you said, it's when they first blow up and start feeding, sometimes those feeds are so fast, 2-3 seconds. If you don't get the cast and land it in there before it ends, you don't have a chance. So being there when it starts is so important.
One other thing that Kevin and I've kind of had I don't know if you call it a theory, but if you're sitting in a place in a kayak for a while, it almost seems like the bait will congregate around it. And then it's like you see something happening in the distance, you pedal 15 feet, and all of a sudden they're right where you were sitting. Whether you scattered the bait or the bait had lost its cover. Like that's happened to us a bunch of times.
Yeah, and we've tried that too. If you're sitting on a ball of bait and it's just kind of doing its defensive thing of being in a ball or a school, and you need something that kind of sets it off and makes the Albies decide to attack. So I'll I'll pedal through real fast, try and blow up the bait ball and see if that maybe gets them off feeding. Sometimes it seems like that works. It might just be, a way that we kill time out there and we get a little bored. But yeah, I think, sometimes doing that, stirring up the water, getting the bait confused, excited, breaking up a bait ball. A lot of times those Albies, I think, are just kind of cruising around and watching and waiting for that one thing that sets them off. And once one Albie feeds, they're not communicating quite like the way you would think. But once one Albie sees another feed, another one goes, and they all kind of join in. They're just looking for that thing that kind of sparks the feed.
Yeah. But what you were saying about sitting in a bait ball, a couple of years ago when those king mackerel were around, I spent like 3 hours sitting in a bait ball, and I ended up getting more than a dozen king macs in that 3 hour period. And it was just sitting in the bait ball and just casting a Rapala and working it outside the bait ball on the edge. And periodically, a king was even coming. They would come and bust through the school right in front of me. I mean, I remember sitting there and looking up and seeing one go skying by me. There, it was really impressive. But the bait were hanging with my kayak because it's, you go offshore, and any little piece of something floating around has bait on it, and those bait fish like to relate to something, anything, and they will relate to kayaks, that's one of the great things about kayaks is that they don't really spook fish like boats do. There are times when I can see on my side scan that the fish are swimming away from my boat. But if you just sit and you quietly drift through them, you drift right over them. Those fish are not, they're not moving on you don't see them moving on your side scan anymore. They're not quite as freaked out by the boats. I was out the other night, well, I guess it was about a month ago, and I was working a pretty solid school of fish, and I got a bump, and I missed it. I set the hook, which kind of shakes the kayak a little bit, and when I shook the kayak, I spooked something right next to the boat, and by right next to the boat, I mean it hit the back of the boat and lifted the back of the boat up a couple of inches. This was not like a little fish. This was a really big fish. At first, I thought it was a seal. It was that big. But it was probably, 45, 48-inch striper that was sitting on the surface right next to my boat. And I can't tell you how many other times I've lifted my lure out of the water and had stripers follow it and just bang off the side of the hull. Just they're charged up. You lift it out of the water, and it's Lucy and Charlie Brown with the football, and Charlie Brown goes sliding into the side of the kayak, and bam! And it's quite startling at 2 a.m. There's some nights that are it's so serene out there, and something like that happens. There was one night where I lifted my lure out of the water, and sometimes when you lift your lure out of the water, you see a swirl or there's a splash. But this one was off. I lifted my lure out of the water, and then it was 1, 2, whoosh. And it was like someone threw a 5-gallon bucket of water on me. Again, it must have been it must have been an upper 40s striper that came up and turned with his tail on the surface and literally just drenched me in water. And just quiet night, calm, other than someone throwing a 5-gallon bucket of water on me.
And then your heart pounding.
And my heart pounding, yes, because it's spooky. But the kayak is very it's very gentle in the environment. It doesn't spook a lot of fish.
So that was, that kind of spooky moment. You're out fishing at night. I assume that's the Boston Harbor area, somewhere around there.
Yes.
What's it like being out in Boston Harbor at night? Is it quiet? What's some of the stuff you see? What's that fishing experience like?
Well, I used to spend most of my time not around anybody. But I will say that fishing around Boston has really changed. The fish used to be very spread out, just a lot of areas with fish, so that everybody had their own spots to fish. You could go back to the same spot over and over again, so you could have spots to yourself. Now there's fewer and fewer spots with quantities of fish, so wherever the fish concentrate, there's more and more boats, especially during commercial season. So it varies from being the only one on the water to last year. People don't realize how well sound carries. Last year, a commercial guy was on the radio. He was probably just 50 feet away from me while I was fighting a fish. And he's I'm down here, and he gives the location. He's there's a guy in a kayak, and he keeps catching fish. And within 10 minutes, I went from being a guy in a kayak that had caught 5 fish on my own to being a guy in a kayak just absolutely surrounded by the commercial fleet. And yes, I did get my 15 fish that night, and they were all released.
That is something that's, it's unfortunate as the striper population has shrunk, and they concentrate in areas. And then on top of that, you have more powerful electronics, which we touched on a little bit, and you've got more communication. You have the commercial striper fishery, which really, encourages people to kind of collapse into one area because they really need a certain size fish and a number of them all at one time. So they need to go where the fish are most concentrated. And so you do have that unfortunate scenario right now in fishing, whether you're boat fishing, kayak fishing, or surf fishing. It's great that more people are into fishing, but you're starting to see that places are getting crowded, especially when there's a good bite going on.
Yeah, it's all about, the bites. And when the bite was better, like when there were more fish around, it really spread people out. Mm-hmm. So people were probably actually catching a lot more fish back then, but they weren't doing it in front of you. They were doing it away from you. They were doing it in their spot. They were doing it, closer to their dock. I used to launch from, just 2 or 3 different places and fish those 2 or 3 different places regularly, where I probably had 4 or 5 miles of coastline that I just regularly fished. And I never really left that for years. And then probably 5 or 6 years ago, it was really obvious that my catches were declining, and then I needed to, spread out and just start hitting more spots. So I'm probably fishing 20, 25 miles of coastline now, and, just fishing more areas and having more bad nights, but also having some really good nights.
I'm seeing that with my surf fishing too over the last few years, where, I've been blaming kind of all the bunker that we've seen for moving the fish around and changing the patterns that I'd had for 7-8 years up until I want to say 2019, 2018. But there's probably also a little bit of the population of striped bass contracting and those fish concentrating in other areas. So you need to cast a wider net, or just kind of grin and bear it and go to the places where all the crowds are, which I'll do that. I'm not opposed to fishing in a big crowd a little bit, but I'd love to find it seems to be tougher and tougher to find good fishing away from crowds now, as the striped bass seem to concentrate in smaller areas.
Yeah, and sometimes you just have to go for the love of fishing instead of, I'm going to go out and catch a 45-inch bass tonight. It's that I'm going to go out and catch, 5 or 6 schoolies and, just have some fun doing it. I was in a bite this morning that, it was blowing 25 miles per hour at 5 o'clock in the morning. So there were no boats on the water, and I had feeding fish all around me. And if I had been specifically targeting stripers, I probably would have shown up a couple hours earlier and had, an array of stuff that I had planned to use. But, it was still fun to get out on that kind of a bite and, just experience the different types of striper fishing. There's that big fish fishing, but there's also last week I was out and I was using weightless baits in some shallow water, in shallow moving water. And so I had a lighter rod, and I'm popping the weightless baits and watching the blow-ups on it and having fun. And it's you really have to enjoy all different types of fishing. And if you're just after trophies, you're going to be disappointed a lot, especially as you age and you realize, I've spent a lot of time fishing, and the probability of me catching a personal best of any kind of fish right now is very low. My best way to catch a personal best right now is to catch a fish I've never caught before. Mm-hmm. So, it's you have to just experience the different types of fishing that are available to you.
And you certainly, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
I was just going to say, and speaking of different types of fish, one fish that I've seen you target a lot from the kayak, and especially in kind of, I would say, the off season when striped bass aren't around, is carp. And so I think you were going to go there anyway.
That's the direction I was heading. The first time I ever fished with you was on March 10th, 2020. And we were carp fishing up in Boston. And it was right after there was that medical convention where a bunch of people got COVID. And I remember being I don't think it's going to be a thing, And that, but no, it was.
I do like doing the carp from the kayak. Surprisingly, carp from the kayak, certain times a year, can be just like big striper fishing. In the late fall carp aggregate. They get in these big winter over schools, and those winter over schools usually last from like the end of October into April or so, into the pre-spawn. And these schools are just enormous. Like again, this is the advantage of side scan, is that you can see how big some of these schools are. So oftentimes these schools are not feeding at all. But if you have 1,500 fish in there and 1% of them are eating, you still have a pretty good shot of catching some fish. And also, when you have fish that concentrated, they're much more likely to hit stuff like jigs because they've eaten up a lot of the vegetation. They're looking for insects, they're looking for small fish, they're looking for crayfish. So they're much more willing to eat stuff that is non-traditional carp.
What are some of the non-traditional lures you use? Because when I think of carp fishing, it's bread balls and corn. So
yeah. Well, the number one lure that I catch them on is a 2-inch crappie tube.
Huh.
And if you're in the school of carp, my recommendation, if you had that 2-inch crappie tube on, just lift it up a foot or so off the bottom and just don't do much with it. Not quite a dead stick, but almost a dead stick, where you just, like, you can just imagine that jig is just hanging on the bottom. Like it's just swimming a foot off the bottom, not really doing anything, not scared. It's like, I'm trying not to be noticed by all these carp because I know you're not going to eat me. And then sooner or later one will come along and eat it. Doesn't happen that much. I mean, I typically only get a handful of carp a year on jigs, but they typically happen in situations that I find on my fish finder, and I've got a rod, and the reason why it happens with the white crappie tube is because that's what I have tied on. Mm-hmm. You know, it's amazing how like our favorite lures are usually what we have tied on, and they work, so they become our favorite lures. It's like this cycle of favor that lures go through, and they create their own goodness. That's why so many people have different favorite lures.
So when you're out there in the fall, you're fishing in the Boston area, and you find some carp schools, and like, what else are you targeting?
Usually panfish. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like to jig panfish, yellow perch, white perch, crappies. You know, crappies are my favorite striper analog too, because like stripers, they hit plastics really, really well, and if you've never fished for stripers with plastics, a really good way to learn is to go out and figure out how to catch crappies on plastics. It's the exact same retrieves. One is with an 8-foot rod and 30-pound test, and the other one is with a 5.5-foot rod and 2-pound test. It's the same thing though. It's like you're recognizing, okay, there's this structural element. Could be current, could be weeds, could be bait, whatever the structural element is that you're fishing. Like with the crappies, it's probably going to be weeds or wood, and with the stripers, it's going to be current or bait. But you're going to cast your jig in it, you're going to work around that structure, and a lot of times, like the joke with crappies, the best way to catch crappies is start off slow, and if you don't do well, you slow down from there. Same rule for stripers. I almost always start off with the slower end of my retrieves, and then if that doesn't work, I go even slower, and if that doesn't work, then I try a bunch of fast retrieves. And when I'm fishing slow, I mean like really, really slow for stripers. With crappies, it's even slower. I mean, with crappies, you may just hang your jig and really dead stick and just keep that finger on the line. And the only reason you give it any motion is to feel whether a crappie has just swam up and put their mouth over your jig. Because they can be exceptionally light biters when they want to be. Especially, I mostly target crappies when the water's like below 50 degrees. So, you know, pretty much everything when the water's below 50 degrees in New England is going through a slower bite phase. Mm-hmm.
And another thing that I've seen you do is, and you've achieved this multiple times, is catch a striped bass every month of the year. What are some of the ways that you target striped bass in the wintertime when most people think, you know, they're not around, so you're fishing technically holdover stripers that are sticking around? How do you manage to do that? How do you manage to catch a striper every month of the year in Massachusetts?
Well, February 2015 was the last month that I did not catch a striper.
Wow,
So-
that's a strong streak right there.
Yeah, so it's a good streak. I feel like I should break it just so that I
Take the pressure off.
yeah, so I don't have like a streak going, because like I just like to fish for the fun. But it just shows you that like I have this thing where I have to get out no matter what time of year it is. And like when it's cold, you really you have to go with the slower retrieves. You have to figure out ways to work your bait. And I'm really good at dead sticking for stripers. and it works. You know, people are like, oh, you're not doing anything, but you kind of are.
Yeah, you said trolling is boring like watching paint dry, but dead
Yes.
sticking.
Dead sticking is exciting compared to trolling. At least you're holding the rod, right? See, like Bob the Garbage Man. I may not fish like he does. I might not be a chunker, but he does not use a rod holder, and I respect that.
Respect to Bob, yes.
Yeah. So, no rod holders, just sitting there, just holding it. And the thing about like dead sticking is it's much harder to hook a fish dead sticking than it is on a retrieve. Because you have that second where they come up, they mouth the bait and spit it out. And, you know, you're fishing for inactive fish when you're dead sticking. So oftentimes it's that bite, spit, and you got to get that hook set just right. And it's always interesting when you hang something really big when you're doing that too. I actually had 1 year where I was consistently finding fish on my fish finder and just not getting into the level of catching that I wanted to be in. And then one night I was just like, I'm drifting over fish constantly. So I took a rod, I put 9 feet off the rod tip, put on a 13-inch hoagie, stuck the rod under my leg, and just continued to fish. And what was really embarrassing for me is I got more bites on the rod under my leg than I got on the rod I was working. I mean, for me, like my value add as an angler is I should be able to take a lure and do more with it than like a rod holder, right? So I was being less effective than a rod holder, which is kind of embarrassing as a fisherman, but it was a lesson for me.
It's like you said earlier, you got the old guy next to you at the jetty out fishing you. You pay attention to what he's doing.
Yes.
If your rod holder's out fishing you, you learn a lesson from
Exactly.
that.
And
Do less.
and that's what I did. And I ended up dead sticking a lot of really good stripers that summer. I got a 48-inch bass on the dead stick directly below my boat.
Wow.
And you know, it's just one of those things that happens. And it was probably a result of whatever bait was around that season. The fish were probably full, digesting, just hanging out in the areas I was fishing and not interested in feeding. But if you held the lure long enough in their face, they'd at least take a nip at it.
Mm-hmm. And you're in a kayak, so they'll swim right below you and not be spooked. I mean, it all kind of everything you were mentioning comes together there.
Yes.
Yeah.
The On the Water podcast is brought to you by Guidesley. Hey, charter captains, are you tired of pouring all your money and time into all the stuff that comes with running a charter business other than the actual fishing? Guidesley gets it. That's why they created Guidesley. Guidesley is built for guides, and they understand and solve the unique challenges that you face every day. Let Guidesley handle your book of business from technology to customer management, leaving you to handle the fishing. Become a guide on Guidesley.com and download the Guidesley Pro app today. Focus on what you do best, putting customers on the fish, and leave the rest for Guidesley to handle.
So I think it was about 5 or 10 years ago. I remember you at some point in there, you were writing about electronics on kayaks, and you said you use your electronics just to see the depth and mark the bottom, look for structure. You're not looking for fish. But you've talked now about how you use your electronics often to see fish and see if they're there. You're using side scan. Does that just speak to the way technology has changed or the way you've changed as a fisherman?
A little of everything. I would say I still use my fish finder more to know my location, but the side scan just gives me so much more information. Because now what I'm doing is I'm like today I was fishing a channel, so I could see where the channel edges are. And I was riding the channel edges and catching fluke. Mm-hmm. So it's like I don't really mark the fluke on my fish finder, but it showed me exactly where I wanted to be. And that's really like above and beyond finding fish, it's really about knowing where you want to be in the water. When I'm crappie fishing, I often don't see crappies because they're up in the weeds. What I'm looking for is the weed line and the weed opportunity. Stripers are big enough, so they're going to show up. But there are spots where, even the side scan doesn't do great when you're in super rocky areas. And now you just have to go with, the side scan is showing me that I'm fishing on an edge. Or here's a sandy break in the rocks, or here's a weed bed break in the rocks. So, it just that the side scan really is helpful in terms of giving you a little bit of extra data. And I also just love having the GPS. GPS in a kayak is amazing. One, for safety. I learned my lesson. I had a GPS with no map on it. And I was out in the outer harbor, Boston, and the fog was so thick that couldn't see anything. I mean, really 30-foot visibility. And I'm looking on my map, and this was in my days of paddling, and I'm trying to paddle a straight line. It's really hard to paddle a straight line with absolutely no reference. And with no map on the GPS, it made it even harder to aim. So, since then I got the Navionics chip, and, you can really dial in and get yourself moving through the fog and get yourself back home. You follow your trails on the GPS. GPS has come a really long ways from where it was like 20 years ago when I started using it.
Yeah, I use that, I would say, more often than looking at the fish finder screen on my on the sonar screen on my kayak. I'm looking at the GPS because I'm watching where I've been, which way I'm drifting. If I'm sea bass fishing, it's so much of it is going back over and doing the same drift, or making sure you're doing a different drift, targeting different areas. And just, if you're not, without that, if you're trying to eyeball it, half the time, I think like, I'm back on the spot. I look at my GPS. No, I'm 100 yards away from where I actually really want to be.
Yep.
It really changes things. And I've always got the backup too. Fish Finder's got the GPS running, and then also on my phone, the Navionics app as well. Keep that going.
Yeah, I get the Navionics chip in my fish finder because I also, I take my kayak everywhere I go on vacation. And I was fishing one lake, and I was jigging for Lakers, and this boater comes up to me, and he's like, "Wow, are you from around here?" I'm like, "No." He's like, "How'd you know the best spot on this lake to jig for Lakers?" And I was like, "I have my ways." I just looked on my Navionics chip and looked over the whole lake, and I was like, okay, that's where the Lakers are going to be. I went there, and that's where they were. And apparently I picked the right spot.
Now, Eric, you use multiple kayaks. Like, you have different kayaks for different applications.
Yes,
is that right?
I do.
So could you run down, what's your fleet look like?
Okay. So, I have the tandem in case I want to take the kids, or it's also fun as a pleasure boat, take out members of the family just for a cruise. But then my primary fishing kayak is a Hobie Revolution. And that's the reason why I do that one is because I'm fishing in current and in big water where there's a lot of wind and waves a lot. And the Revolution's just a really fast kayak.
How long is that one?
I have two. I have the 16 and the 13. They don't make the 16 anymore. But both the 16 and the 13 just cut through the waves really well. And they're very fast for pedaling.
And the trade-off for that speed is it's not going to have stand-up stability, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So it's really good in the rough water. And then when I want to fish stand-up, I have freshwater, I have a Hobie Outback. And that is much wider. It's much more, because it's a shorter kayak, it's only a 12-foot kayak, it's more likely to take waves over the bow, but it's an extremely seaworthy kayak. I mean, it's in a lot of areas people use it for going offshore, but you lose about a mile per hour on the speed compared to the Revolution.
I didn't realize.
Yeah,
that.
the Revolution's really fast.
That's significant.
Really, really flies, especially when you get up to the 16. The 16 is really easy to fly in. And the Outback, it's not that it's slow. It's a heavier kayak and requires more effort. But you can stand up in it, and there's no way I can stand up in my Revolutions. So when I go freshwater fishing, I have to take the Outback, and any type of fishing that I wanted to do, where I wanted to stand up. It's the other thing about the Revolution is that especially with the 16, it's a long kayak, so it's got a lot. It wants to continue to go the direction it's going. So once you get going, it wants to go straight. You're not going to get tight corners that you are on a shorter kayak. So it's really good for covering open water, where shorter kayaks are going to be better for tighter situations. Like if you want to fish around bridges, a lot of guys go tog fishing around bridges, jig fluke in areas where they really want to stay tight to a pier or something like that. The Outbacks are great. Any kayak that's shorter is going to just give you a tighter turning radius.
A little more maneuverability.
Yeah.
So you mentioned traveling, kayak fishing in different areas. Every time you go on a vacation or a trip, try and take the kayak with you. You took a trip overseas and fished in the Hobie Worlds a few years back. Isn't
Yes.
that right?
Yeah.
Where was that?
Okay. I actually did 2 Hobie Worlds.
Okay.
And the first one was in Leeville, Louisiana. And that one was for redfish. And so I caught my first redfish, my first sea trout. I still can't call them sea trout. I want to call them weakfish. So let's settle on specks.
Specs.
And
Nice.
I caught my first black drum. And so that was a really fun tournament. I mean, it's the Hobie tournaments are really well organized, and that's an international event, so it's just at a different level than any tournament that most of us have done before.
Yeah, the Hobie Worlds there's qualifying events.
Yeah.
The Striper Cup was one for a couple years. And basically, if you win these events, you have the opportunity to go to Hobie Worlds. And when you go there, it's not like you're not taking your kayak with you. To
Right.
Louisiana. They have everything set up when you get down there.
You show up, and they have 50 identically rigged kayaks. So you're in the Pro Angler 14. They all have Lowrance electronics on them. They have power poles. They're completely rigged out. All you have to do is show up with rods and reels and a bag of tackle, and that's it. So that was really nice.
And you have fishermen representing different countries from all around the world.
Yeah, there's 17 different countries represented. So
And your first one was Louisiana. The second one was somewhere. I'm so jealous. I'd love to go fish.
the second one was in Australia. It was Gold Coast, Australia, which was beautiful. So my wife and I went there for 2 weeks, and the second week of it was doing the Hobie Worlds. And so you show up, and basically the fish that we were going to fish for was scup. Okay, you laugh, but now imagine a scup that's more finicky than any trout you've ever fished for.
So super picky scup.
Super picky scup.
Halfway around the world.
Halfway around the world. And, I flew to Australia, and I'm like, so really, we're going to target fish that weigh 2 pounds? And we did. It was actually a lot of fun. I think the biggest fish I caught there was probably a 5-pound tarpon. I caught it on a 2-inch finesse fish when I was fishing for the bream. But it was really it was a really good fishing experience. I love having different kinds of fishing experiences. I like to try all different things. So before I went, I ordered myself 6 new ultralight rods. I got stuff from Mudhole and built myself a bunch of new ultralight rods, figured out which ones I liked, and I think I ended up taking 5 of them. And so it was all really light tackle fishing. So it was just a different kind of fishing than I had done before.
And it's artificials only, right?
Artificials only, yep. The most popular bait was a gulp substitute or these plastic crabs. And I did not understand how to fish those plastic crabs until the last day of the tournament. On the last day of the tournament, I went out and we're fishing these little, they weigh 1/3 of an ounce, fishing in 30 to 35 feet of water with current. And that last day, I finally was started to cull fish and get through my bag and do well. And I was like, damn, if I had known this the first day, I would have done a lot better here. But I've since, I brought a few of those back with me, and I've since ordered a whole bunch more because I found they're killer on tog. I caught sheep's head on them. They work really well on stripers. The problem with them is that they're designed to be fished on really light line. Like the Aussies will fish these things on 4-pound tests all the time. And they're very patient people. So like these bream will also rock you like a tog will. But they're not quite as into going into the rocks as tog are. Because what I found is that most of like 90% of the tog that I hang on this, I will use a very light rod. I'll use 8-pound braid, but then I'll bump up the leader to either 17 or 20 pound just for the abrasion resistance. And the togs also don't seem to mind. But when they go into the rocks, just open the bail, wait them out. And these little crabs are just, they're crazy because it's a bit on the sink lure. So you cast them around structure, and all you do is you let them sink, and you just feel that line going down. And then you lift them back up, and you just feel that line going down. And you'll feel the togs tapping at them, tap, 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 and then you'll feel one come up and just bite it. Set the hook on it.
It's called the cranka crab, right?
Yes.
So I've seen you've posted pictures on Instagram. We've shared them on the water Instagram as well, where it looks just like almost an Asian shore crab. It was one of the invasive crabs we have here in the Northeast, and it looks just like the crab, and it has 2 tiny treble hooks on it.
It's got treble hooks in the claws, and attached to each treble hook is a floating claw. So when it sinks down, the claws float up. And it sinks down in this natural defensive position. So the fish come and hit the claws. And that's how you hook them. And people are like, oh, you can't catch tog with treble hooks. It's like, yes, you can. And the treble hooks that they use are super high quality, super sharp. You have to use like forceps to take them out because those treble hooks penetrate everything. Fingers, legs, everything. So yeah, you don't even want to be touching those treble hooks when there's a fish around. So you get it out of the fish with forceps.
That sounds like a fun way to target tog. What's the biggest blackfish you've caught on the cranka crab?
Not that big, probably around 20 inches. But I got a 22.5-inch sheep's head. When I was down in Jersey.
They're notoriously picky.
Yeah.
I mean, to the point where I know guys talk about what crabs they like and don't like. To catch one on an artificial, and it was in Jersey.
Yeah.
I want a New Jersey sheep's head. I've caught them in Florida. I need one in New Jersey. That's pretty cool. That's very cool.
Yeah, I ended up catching 2 of them on that vacation. I got one on a sand crab and one on a cranka crab. And the one on the cranka crab was where the guy in the bait shop told me not to fish for them.
Why?
He just said it's not worth going there.
What bait shop was it? I'm just curious.
I can't remember the name. It's the first one in Cape May.
Okay, so a little bit further south.
Yeah.
I was more Ocean City, Sea Isle, Avalon was my stomping grounds down there. So.
Yeah. But, there's always some percentage of just that the guy from somewhere else doesn't know where to fish, right? So he tries a whole bunch of different spots and, the blind squirrel finds the nut. So, the other one I caught in the classic place to catch it, it was on a piling. It was with a sand crab. I placed it perfectly. And the best thing about it was, I was like, okay, I am now going to go try to catch a sheep's head. I put that sand crab on as I'm approaching this bridge. There's my first piling. Swing it onto the first piling. It sinks down. I feel a tap and I'm on. Mission accomplished.
You know how many years I've been trying to do that? How many small short tog I've caught? I mean, that's the one thing that really impressed me about that is you go look for the sheep's head, you'll catch 100 12-inch tog. There's so many of them in those you think would be too warm for them. You kind of associate tog as a cold water fish, but there are a whole bunch in the back bays of South Jersey right through the summer.
Jersey has a lot of tog. And there were times where it's just like, oh, I can't. And that's one of the disadvantages of that crab is that it catches a lot of those small fish. So you do go through a lot of small fish, and so it can get tedious. So that, try something else. Try a big chunk of crab or something. But I generally don't bring crabs with me either. So the cranky crab is a way for me to get them. And then periodically you're drifting it along there. My very first drop, I dropped it in, and I had like a 10-pound test leader on there, and I had my drag pretty tight because I'm targeting tog, and I feel a thump, I set the hook, and this fish just goes tearing off. I had my drag way too tight, so I busted the leader after a 30-foot run, and it was obviously a full-size striper. So last year I got like a 15-pound striper on it and fishing for tog. So, it's just a fun little lure to fish, and it all came out of that trip to Australia.
The other thing, I don't know if this came from Australia, but you fish small blade baits for porgies. I've seen you going, if you're going to catch porgies, might as well have fun, go ultralight with the tackle and the lures, and that's something that looks like a blast too.
Yeah, that really came from my fall fishing around Boston. Like as fall transitions to winter and then winter transitions to spring, blade baits are just absolute killers on panfish, especially if you're in one of these lakes that it has a lot of the 15 to 25 foot areas. Those flats are really perfect for working those blade baits. And I was thinking about the scup, and I was like, scup they're just bigger crappies, right? So I brought my crappie rod and one of the blade baits and flipped it out there, stuck a scup, and after catching 5 or 6 of them and some of them some pretty decent sized ones, I need to use my smallmouth bass rod for these, not my crappie rod for these, because it shouldn't take you like 5 minutes to bring in a scup, right?
No.
So I think if I lived down in the Cape, I would just be so distracted by scup. So I'm glad I don't live here, because I like fish that like to hit lures and are stupid. So stripers, scup, and crappies. Those are in my strike zone right there.
Yeah, a lot of times when you're albie fishing, you're waiting for the albies, you're not catching. It's really tempting to just drop that albie jig down to the bottom and catch some scup.
It never fails. Like I'll be tangled up with a 10-inch sea bass, and then there are the albies finally. No matter what.
I usually resist that and only fish for scup. Like I will always fish for scup on my albie days, but I'll only do it like after I'm sure that like my albie fishing is over. And then you always get those couple opportunities. Last year on one of the trips, like I did splasher and feather in the morning when they weren't breaking. Didn't see a single breaking fish. And so then I was like, well, I'm going to go somewhere else and see if there's any breaking fish. Went to a new spot, no breaking fish. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to bring home some scup for dinner. So I started jigging up some scup, and now I see a couple breaking fish. Bam, got my shot, got my albie.
So you've caught a ton of different species kayak fishing. What's still out there that's kind of like on your dream list? What fish do you still want to catch from the kayak?
Oh boy. Well, I'm not one of these guys who dreams of catching a bluefin from the kayak. At a certain age, like the bigger a fish is, it doesn't necessarily make it more appealing. So I would say like one of the fish that I want to catch from the kayak is a bowfin, because I've never even seen one. But yeah, I don't like have a bucket list of fish that I want to catch. It's like everywhere I go, I want to try it. Like I've had some really fun fish from the kayak, like going down to Louisiana and catching those redfish was super fun. I spent a week at actually 2 different weeks at Lake Gaston, North Carolina, and I was trolling bunker chunks for catfish. Oh my God. Talk about addicting. Like that is bait fishing I can get into. Like you're trolling at like anywhere from a half a mile per hour to 1.5 miles per hour looking for structure. And this was before I had side scan. I can only imagine what you could do with side scan. Like what you're looking for is stump fields. So when you find those stump fields, you just kind of zigzag through them and you keep it like 5 feet off the bottom, and these stripers, these blue cats come up and they smack the bait. And I really like my second trip down there, I really started to get dialed in on this technique. And like my last 2 days, I got multiple 20-pound fish each day, and ended my trip with a 42.5-inch, 42-pound fish on a trolled chunk.
It's a big catfish.
Yeah, it was, and that's not even big for down there. And that was the thing. Like Lake Gaston has produced like 100-pound catfish, and that area has produced like a lot of really big catfish. So that's like a super fun type of fishing that is perfect for kayakers.
So my list of things to Google after this conversation now, I've got the crank-a-crab, the splasher casting bubble. I got to find some of those on eBay. And now it's blue catfish fishing in North Carolina.
Yes.
Okay.
They go up to the Potomac. I've thought about trying it on the Potomac River just because that's it's like right on the cusp of day trip range from my parents' house in Philadelphia. And I wish we had more big catfish up here.
Yeah.
That's something that seems really missing from New England. I guess there's good channels, but not as many.
My understanding with the blues is that they're moving up the coast. So they can actually go into the saltwater and are going from river to river. So one day we may have them into Connecticut sooner rather than later.
There's been a couple that have gone through the C&D Canal into the Delaware River. So I know that I have heard that they can, because I know the blue crabbers down in the Chesapeake hate them.
Yeah.
Because they do a number on, I mean, they're, a 40-pound fish eats an awful lot of crabs and other fish. So they're kind of a problem.
Many of the fish that I caught were full of mussels. Like they would just eat the freshwater mussels whole. And their bellies were just like fat, and you could feel them in there.
Speaking of kayak bucket list fish, I checked off one of mine with you this spring, which was a cod from the kayak. It's something I never thought I would ever catch from a kayak. A couple years ago, I've been seeing you catch them on Instagram. I had a chance to go with you. What was it, first week of April?
Yeah.
Second week of April, and we got them.
Yeah.
It was very cool. We had a right whale around us too.
Yeah.
It was quite the experience.
Cod are just a really fun kayak fish too. Especially with like a one fish limit. It's like, do you really want to take your motorboat out and, especially these days, spend $7 a gallon for gas to go catch your one cod when you can just, cod are like, if you look at the Northeast, pretty much anywhere where you can get like 60 feet of water, you're going to find some cod. They're there, whether people are fishing for them or not. Water along the coastline here, as it gets deep, it gets cold. And the cod like that colder water. They cod are caught off Rhode Island. They're caught off out of Boston, out of, South Shore, out of North Shore. They're all over the place. And there's a lot more inshore fish than people realize.
And you're right with that one. It's not a viable boat target really to go and they open the season so it runs alongside the haddock season. So if you catch your one cod, you can keep it. But that does make it perfect for a kayak. For going out there, especially. It wasn't that long of a paddle. It felt long to me. I was a little, I still am, but out of shape from the long winter. But
yeah, but that was also like we went out much further because that early season, the fish really aren't inshore yet. The fish really come inshore around June. So that early season is not favorable for the inshore crew. Like right now, there's just tons of fish. And I jigged up cod last weekend in 25 feet of water. I was jigging for big cunner. And, you periodically jig up and it just stops. And the rod tip shakes because, you're using light tackle. Basically using the same gear you'd use for smallmouth bass. And I was catching, 1.5 to 2 pound cunner, and this cod came along, and I ended up getting a couple of cod right up and close there, and then moved down to the bottom of the drop, and I saw a ton of cod in like that 55-foot area, and that was all within less than a half a mile from shore. So a much shorter ride than what you went on.
We've covered a lot of species today. We were joking earlier the battery, we had to switch out the battery on the camera, and Eric said like, how many days is this going to go on for? Because there's just so much you can cover, and it's really impressive. I really admire that about you, that you fish for your personal enjoyment. if you wanted to get the Instagram likes, you could just go out and target big striped bass, put the photo of a big striped bass on your lap, and that's going to get the most attention. But you fish for your love of fishing, and that means targeting everything from, like you just said, you were out jigging cunner last week. I don't know too many people who are doing that. You have a fascination for different fish species, different ways of catching them, and learning more about every fish species wherever you go. That's really impressive, and I really just appreciate you coming through here today and sharing some of these stories, sharing your experiences, and sharing some really great information also in there.
All right. It was great to be here with you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, man. Great seeing you.
All right.